Okay, Clive, I think you can probably take things away now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alex. So I don't want to go too far into the preamble, but just for those of you who just attended, my name is Clive McDonald. I head up the sales engineering team for EMEA in Sumo. Today, we'll be focusing on, within the context of our Cloud SIEM Enterprise technology, Office 365 compromise, as it's been exhibited in the wild against one of our customers' accounts. So I want to kind of just take the opportunity to kind of set the stage with regards to, the problem that we're trying to address, and really put things into context before we go into the demo. So as we all know, data is growing exponentially. You've heard that, being bandied about for a multitude of years with regards to the growth of data. And that data, for varying different values and context, all exhibits itself in different ways within your organization. But ultimately, there is a discernible value around this data. In order to be competitive in the market going forward, being able to mine that data and derive meaning from that data isn't really an optional dynamic or equation that you can make a judgment call against. You have to do this as part and parcel of any modern enterprise, being able to talk to that data, extract meaning from that data, and ultimately secure the data within the context of this demo. So how do we address this problem? Now, Sumo has been in the market for over 10 years now, being a cloud native platform, really talking to this problem day in, day out. Now, we are in a lucky situation to some degree, whereby our founders understood the value of the cloud, because the cloud is the only place whereby you can actually deal with this exponential growth, where you have a situation where you have infinite compute, infinite storage, and the infinite ability to analyze these data sizes that we're now talking to in the orders of petabytes and zettabytes. So when we look at this data, we're talking to unstructured, structured, and semi-structured data, all of which emanate from various different data sources. This telemetry being generated from containers, your security data being generated from endpoint and infrastructure security tools, various different microservices, IoT, all of which generates different types of digital exhaust, whether it be time series metrics, whether it be events, logs, traces. All of this telemetry is being generated, and historically, you used to have a scenario where you had siloed tools to talk to these data sets, and then subsequently these tools service different audiences within the enterprise. And there was a time when that worked perfectly well. But now you are in a situation, and a paradigm shift occurred, whereby all of these disparate data sets have a degree of interconnectivity that is, first of all, should be abstracted from those individual users, but ultimately the interconnectivity is essential for those various different users and audiences within the enterprise to be able to do their job and demonstrate value to both their customers and their internal audiences as well. So you're going down a path of having to collect, monitor, visualize, predict, and understand the dynamic and the information being generated by this digital exhaust, and then servicing different communities. The problem being these individual siloed tools did not speak to each other and do not speak to each other, and then subsequently reduces the fidelity and the clarity that those individual teams supporting that infrastructure actually have on a day-to-day basis. So Sumo, as the leader in continuous intelligence, we've developed that category. We've gone down the path of actually breaking down those silos, being able to talk to operational, security, business, and other global use cases as they exhibit themselves within the enterprise. Now, for the sake of this particular session, we'll be focused on our Cloud SIEM Enterprise module within the continuous intelligence platform. But suffice to say, we do service a whole litany of different use cases within the enterprise. So let's talk about the problem as it presents itself with regards to a legacy SIEM. Now, fundamentally, the term legacy, the clue's in the name ultimately. When we talk about cloud transformation, I think we all know one of the most inelegant ways of achieving transformation, i.e. moving workloads to the cloud, is the lift and shift approach, i.e. let's take an application, a 3-tier application, and move it directly into the cloud without actually leveraging a lot of the benefits of the cloud. You're basically migrating your technical debt from your on-premise infrastructure to the cloud. Now, that's the worst scenario, as it were, in relation to performing a cloud migration in relation to your workloads. So, you know, most organizations go down the path of re-architecting their applications to better leverage the infrastructure upon which they are now being moved to. But legacy SIEMs, by their very, very, very basic, architecture, you're basically asking, you know, your SIEM to basically perform a function and to be able to analyze data that it wasn't designed to do. You're asking to take all of the technical debt that exhibits itself within that legacy SIEM architecturally, and actually asking it to address an infrastructure it fundamentally does not understand. So when we talk about that infrastructure, let's take a few salient examples. Microservices. If you take an ephemeral Docker container, it may exist for an hour, it may exist for 10 minutes, it may exist for 5 minutes, subject to the use of that particular container. How does a conventional SIEM address that type of problem? You know, that's a relatively straightforward proposition. But when you think about that within the context of microservices, and you add ephemeral compute such as serverless, and all of the challenges that exhibit themselves there, you're in a scenario whereby you're fundamentally in a situation that a legacy SIEM cannot address these challenges, these security concerns, and this particular threat landscape as that environment shifts and changes. Then you have the additional problem of alert fatigue. We've already talked to the scale of data growing over a period of time exponentially. And what we tend to get now is the same teams using legacy tools that were designed to actually address tens or hundreds of alerts, now being deluged with thousands, tens of thousands of alerts on a daily basis. And then what tends to happen is normal human behavior, the more you're exposed to something, i.e. the alerts, the more you tolerate that thing, normalize it, and in the worst case scenario, ignore it. So there are some significant threats that are being ignored by really, you know, well-trained, well-disciplined individuals just being presented with a problem that they cannot actually sift through. So ultimately your teams are becoming snowblind, they become disenchanted. They, you know, even with the best will in the world, productivity goes down significantly as the problem increases. So it's no longer a human scale challenge. So we need to modernize your security operations. Now, there are a lot of organizations leaning into this direction, but we would argue that we are the only platform that has experience in this field. And this has been demonstrated in the wild against a couple of scenarios, which we'll talk to in a little bit more detail. So let's go to the building blocks of this modern SIEM. It fundamentally has to be multi-tenant and elastic in its nature. You cannot predict the unpredictable. And if you take that as a given, you need an environment that's automatically able to elastically scale and accommodate that unpredictability. The historical silos between your security teams, your operational teams, your dev teams, your SREs, while that was a tenable situation 5 or 10 years ago, fundamentally now, just when you talk to the infrastructure, the complexity of your environment, those silos have to be broken down. The security teams of today and in the future need to be able to accommodate and talk to differing audiences in a common language, as it were, and share information accordingly, because no one individual or team has the keys to the kingdom, as it were, in relation to the modern enterprise. And that collaborative approach is a must. You fundamentally need to be cloud agnostic. There are a lot of vendors that are tied to one cloud or another cloud vendor, but fundamentally, if you've adopted a multi-cloud strategy, tying yourself into a single vendor is really not an option. And then how do you bring this all together? Automating and really letting machines do what they're best at doing, ultimately, augmenting the individuals on the ground, your SOC teams and your analysts, in order to amplify their effectiveness and actually take some of the monotony out of their day-to-day engagements, and actually then subsequently increasing and securing your security posture even further. And then fundamentally going back to the analyst experience, really building a UI that provides meaningful information in a very succinct manner that's consumable, and the information and the telemetry being given to the individual analysts or engineers is actually actionable and meaningful. So they focus their energies on things that are actually meaningful, as I say. So we'll get into the demo shortly, but I just want to summarize some of the points that I've touched on. And this isn't purely Sumo centric, but these are some fundamental things that in any SIEM within this space, these are some issues that we really need to address. So, correlation is a core fundamental premise of any SIEM. But correlation by itself without context, in many cases, can become meaningless. So, contextual correlation is key. Being able to automate some of the mundane, time-consuming, labor-intensive tasks. Ultimately, I want to reiterate this point, it's no longer a machine problem. Machine data is generated by machines, and subsequently, a lot of that should be addressed by machines, and allow human beings to use their skill and expertise as we always have done in meaningful ways to make those logical inferences that machines cannot make. And then finally, the user experience. A highly tuned user interface built for analysts, made by analysts, that really talk to analysts' problems, rather than just burying individuals in a litany of messages that they're just physically not equipped to actually deal with. So without any further ado, I'll move into the demo, unless there are any additional questions. Alex?
No, there's no questions at this stage, although I would obviously encourage the attendees to use the question Q&A button at the bottom of the screen if they do have any questions. Great,
I appreciate that, Alex, thank you. So let's talk to this HUD, this user experience that we're actually looking at. And I'll walk through this quite quickly, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of this particular session around Office 365 compromise. So I'll take you through this briefly. So if you look at the left-hand side, you see records. We've got 2 million records. Now, what do records represent? Let's take it through visually. So we have this radar screen that goes over a 24-hour period, 12 o'clock being the 12th hand, I should say, being the time it is right now, currently. And then retrospectively, you can go backwards through time and look over a snapshot as to what's occurred over that 24-hour period. And the blue bar, the thick blue bar you see here, is a reflection of the records being ingested into the platform. You see peaks and troughs as data is being ingested. And when we say data, we're talking about the raw log messages being pulled into this platform. And that's the way you would view that. And then we have the second tier, where you have signals, as you can see here. It's reflected by 76,000 signals being pulled into this platform. And this is the home of the conventional legacy SIEM, where you have correlation rules aligned to particular data sources. Now, when I say legacy, we do service this audience as well. We have over 300 correlated rules within the platform. And if you were going to use the nomenclature of the likes of a Splunk, that would be seen as a notable event, or ArcSight, correlated event, or QRadar as an offense. Within that dynamic, that's where these technologies live, and they do a great job. But here's the kicker, here's the problem. You have 76,000 messages over a 24-hour period to address. Now, whether you have a SOC team of 1 or a SOC team of 21, that's not an inconsequential problem. And this isn't an abnormal reflection of the number of alerts coming into a relatively modest SOC environment. So how do we address that noise? How do we address this data deluge? Within the third tier, within the third circle of this radar, this is where we really add value, and this is what we would call insights. This is where we go the extra mile, as it were, in order to really rationalize and give meaningful insights to your SOC engineers and to your analysts to focus their energies in areas that are of really significant worth. And this is really where we augment the whole triage of alerts within your organization. So let's go into a little bit more detail about what an insight actually is and what it consists of. Now, we have 4 insights here reflected, and these are sequentially viewed from top to bottom, i.e. the most, the latest insight that's just come in, and then subsequently the last insight. And for the sake of this demo, we're going to go into this credential access breach, being the newest. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about what constitutes an insight. So how do we get to this point of view, first and foremost, as to what this insight actually is? It says it in the description: initial access with execution and credential access. This is the possible threat. Now, an insight constitutes an amalgam of various different signals, i.e. correlation rules. Now, we can see here there are 6 unique signals that make up this particular insight, and the last seen was over 5 hours ago. Now we have the dwell time, which is an indicator of the time from the first insight, the first signal being generated to the last signal that would generate the insight. This is the whole duration of this particular incident, if you want to frame it in a different term. And we'll go through each of these individual signals in detail, and then we'll go through how we actually can address and how your engineer would actually look at this in the real world. So let's go through this particular signal. So we have reflected here a time window in which this whole insight actually has been generated, and we'll go through this sequentially. So 0365, a potential malicious URL was clicked, or click was detected. The clues in the name is quite self-explanatory. We're getting telemetry from Office 365. There's a detected malicious URL, and possibly a click was detected within that. Now, in isolation, that would be of note, but it wouldn't be something your SOC engineers would immediately, focus their energies upon. But subsequently, when you marry that with threat intel, with threat intel information derived again, in this case from Office 365, marrying not only that click with a potential malicious URL, you now got a little bit more of a picture as to this being something that's worth a little bit more focus upon. Okay, and then we'll go through to the next possible signal or issue of note: multiple failed authentications. So we have multiple authentications, in this case 10, as you can see here, 10 authentication requests coming in from this particular user, Napoleon Dynamite, which is a user entity. And we were able to pivot on entities, username, IP address, and so on. So we now have 3 individual items: a malicious URL, possible click, a malicious URL that's been confirmed, and multiple authentications assigned to a particular user, all of which you would manually have to historically have gone through as an analyst or a SOC engineer to basically ascertain. And then that, to add insult to injury, you now have got a scenario where you have multiple authentication attempts from 2 differing countries in under an hour. Actually, significantly less than an hour, actually 20 minutes apart. One from Nigeria and one from the USA. Significantly suspicious. So you have all of these events. Now we're looking at what, number 4 of 6. There's 2 more to talk to. Now, not only has that attempt been attempted, that user has been successful in logging in from 2 different countries in under an hour. Now, we all know that many people use VPNs and tunneling, and that could also be the use case or the reason for this particular event in isolation. But when you marry all of these different connected tissues together, it now becomes a smoking gun. And finally, we've got confirmation that not only person logged in, they've got confirmed that they're actually logged in and actually utilizing Office 365 in differing locations. Now, this isn't just an engineered demo. This is a real world threat as it exhibited itself in the wild with one of our customers. Obviously, we've sanitized this particular threat for the sake of this demo, but this is an example of the automation and the power of the Sumo platform, and the value that our customers are able to derive from that. Now, we've got the context, we've got the smoking gun. Now, what does an engineer do? Because not only is it important to actually alert and tell somebody that something's gone awry, you need to have a workflow and a framework in order to address this issue, this threat, in a meaningful way. So we can assign a status to this particular insight. So you can click in progress, which it currently is, because I'm going through this right now. And you can subsequently assign this to individuals. So I can assign this to Alex, or if you have different SOC teams or individual teams within your organization, you can assign it to teams of individuals accordingly, and then track the status of this particular threat. Alternatively, if you wish to automate, and again, going to the augmentation, going to actually dealing with the monotony of threats as they exhibit themselves, if you've got a really well-rounded contextual possible breach, you may wish to automate some of the actions. So we can integrate with your SOAR platforms such as Demisto, Swimlane, or something akin to that. We can execute an AWS SNS, so not pertinent with regards to Office 365, but we can also do that with regards to Azure. We can execute an action, an automated action in relation to this particular event if we see that is a direction that we wish to go down. In addition to that, just to wrap things up, we can create tags assigned to this particular insight. So in the event that this actually exhibited itself again, you would have a catalog of insights that you'll be able to search very easily and understand what happened before. And then subsequently, you can add comments to this particular insight and or breach. So, that's a brief drive through with regards to what we can do, and some of the out-of-the-box functionality that we're able to bring to bear, and some of the value that we're able to address in relation to Cloud SIEM Enterprise. So with that, I will just move into Q&A. I'll take a pause there, and hopefully we can service some questions, and hopefully, some of what we discussed today will be, of interest to you, and you'll pose a few questions. So with that said, Alex, has anything come into the chat?
Yes, it has, Clive. There is one or two questions. Thank you very much for that. It's obviously fascinating to see how Cloud SIEM Enterprise stitches together these signals. Just before we start dealing with the questions, if participants want to ask questions, you'll find a Q&A button at the bottom of the webinar, so please feel free to click that and type your questions. The first question, so I'll take this one here. Funny, probably the most fundamental question: how much does Cloud SIEM Enterprise cost? So actually, we'd rather that you speak either with your local Sumo Logic sales rep or a Sumo authorized reseller. But for those that can't bear the curiosity, if you head over to sumologic.com/pricing, you'll see there's a page there that outlines the packages that are available. There's also a great little interactive tool that you can use to look at what we call credits-based licensing. So this is a novel, unique way, certainly unique in the SaaS SIEM market, and it helps provide sort of economic transparency in terms of the cost of operating the
let me add to that as well, Alex. So historically within the SIEM environment, you have to, it's the devil in the deep blue sea in many cases. You're in a scenario, you are charged or you're penalized for the more data that you look at, the more expensive it subsequently becomes. With regards to Sumo, we have a pricing model that allows you to collect nearly everything, if not everything, as far as your log data or digital exhaust is concerned. And then if you deem that to be of a certain value or warrant a certain degree of scrutiny, we have a mechanism to allow you to actually scrutinize that data without taking that subsequent initial price impact. So, something that would be happy to talk to you about going forward.
Yeah, thanks. So another question is, how long does a CSE deployment take? So let me take a stab at that one. So the short answer is it takes a fraction of the time it takes legacy SIEMs to deploy. Cloud SIEM Enterprise is is provided as a SaaS. Its time to value is measured in hours and not days or months as you would with a legacy SIEM. There's no extensive design, scaling, having to build and scale out on-premise infrastructure. The system engineering aspect is all taken care of as part of the SaaS-based SIEM. You don't have to worry about scalability. If your ingest loads are increasing, that's obviously something that the SaaS SIEM takes care of. And then there's a bunch of content out of the box built in, obviously, for performing the detections and obviously bubbling up the insights. So as I said, we really measure deployment time in hours versus weeks if you compare with other SIEMs.
Yeah, and one other point as well. I mean, as a true SaaS platform, it's a scenario whereby you don't have to raise tickets in order to expand ingest, as an example, or make a change request for function X or function Y to actually be enacted. We are a true SaaS platform, and you avail yourself of all of the functionalities of Sumo subsequent to your subscription. So that's another benefit there.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, I think we've got time maybe just for one final question here. Maybe if you wanted to take a shot at this one here, Clive. So, we talked about alert triage. Do people still need a tier 1 SOC function to triage alerts? Or can we maybe look at repurposing that team?
Well, yes, you alluded to that perfectly, right? So that's the ultimate desire of the Cloud SIEM within Sumo, to augment your teams whereby tier 1 triage is automated, allowing machines to do what machines do, and then repurposing and refocusing your team on meaningful investigations and triage.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're just running up against the time for this webinar. So just really to wrap things up, thank you, obviously, everyone that's attended today. The turnout has been fantastic. Thanks very much for all of the questions. And of course, thanks very much to Clive McDonald for the excellent demonstration.
Why, thank you, Alex. And yes, thank you for your time today. I know time is of value to everybody. So taking the time and listening to me drivel on is really appreciated. And hopefully you've derived some value from this, and would love to speak to you further. So thanks again.